add value to your business, or do you want to just be this administrative person?
And often, if you look at your talent team and the caliber of talent in your company, they correlate.
You could hire the best person for the job if they were in your candidate pool.
All these individual employees, one by one, together, their voices all come together to articulate the culture of the company.
This is hiring.
Hiring on all cylinders.
Oh yeah, recruiters, sourcers, directors, talent partners, dare I say? Hiring on all cylinders takes back to the airwaves once more from the cozy confines of Entelo HQ. I am, as ever, Rob Stevenson, and today's episode is going to be a good one. Sometimes we get in here and I tell you all it's going to be a good one, but really I'm thinking, oh boy, I hope Amina's got something to talk about, because not the case here, because we have the thrilling conclusion to Rob and Amina hire their bosses. More on that later. Amina is sat right across from me. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm okay.
Actually, I'm not great.
Kind of a weird day. Let's not get too much into that. There are lots of other podcasts you can listen to if you want to get into why November 9th, 2016 was a monumental, sad day for a lot of people. But not the point. Amina, how are your roles going? What are you working on?
I'm working on senior software engineer right now. It's been an interesting transition. It's been very, very interesting learning how the technical side is. I've been focusing mostly my career on the business side, so it's been great to get a lot more exposure on the engineering side, work with engineers, work with engineering leadership, do some sourcing on completely different profiles. Also starting to look for a director of enterprise as well for our enterprise sales team, which is really exciting and shows that we're continuing to grow.
What's different in recruiting for these technical roles versus the more traditional business ones that you've been working on recently?
Well, first off, it's profile. Obviously, I'm looking at completely different profiles. I'm having to understand what our technology stack is, what do different engineers work on, learning about different programming languages, what are ones that we work on, what are ones that maybe engineers are using right now, but their experience could come over here and still transition. For example, maybe an engineer is working on Python, but we're working on Java. They can still come in and learn Java, and those are some things that I've just never learned before. So I would say those are the big things. It's also working with different leadership. So I've primarily worked with business leaders within an organization. So now working with engineering leaders, learning how the product is really being built and what are the challenges and what are the exciting things that we're doing on the product side.
And then outreach, I'm sure, is a little different too, right?
Outreach is different. Obviously, I always want to have a very personal approach to all the outreach that I send out to candidates, but I've been focusing on having really personal outreaches, because I think that engineers especially probably get 10 emails a day from different engineering leaders and recruiters, so really trying to differentiate ourselves from all of the other emails that they're getting.
Gotcha. More on that later. I could keep picking your brain about that, but I don't want to let our very exciting special guest wait too long. For a few months now, we've been doing a regular segment, Rob and Amina hire their bosses, and I'm happy to report that both Rob's and Amina's bosses are now officially hired. One of them is very relevant to you because she is our head of recruiting, and she has also spent time as a senior director, head of global recruiting for Lithium Technologies. Britt Ryan is her name. She is sat right across from me. Britt, how are you? Welcome.
I'm great, Rob. Thanks. How are you?
I'm really thrilled that you're here.
Me too.
And as soon as we made the hire, I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot wait to get her on the podcast. But I was like, let's wait. Let's let her settle in. Let her get her bearings a little bit before I shove a microphone in your face.
My first podcast.
Oh yeah, me too. Not my first episode, but you get the idea. So you're a month in now.
I am. And
so you've kind of had an opportunity to get the lay of the land. So I'm curious, just kind of pick your brain on stuff like, let's get specific, and we'll start with, like, what are some examples of stuff that you ripped out? Like, let's beat up the process that Amina has built in the last couple of years.
I know there was a lot of work to do there, a whole lot of cleanup. She made a big mess in a short time. How long have you been here for?
7 months.
Okay. No, seriously, I have to say one of the things that really surprised me, having been in other environments that are high growth and having gone progressively smaller throughout my career and trying to always sort of find companies that are growing and that can be a good place for me to bring my experience having scaled in other organizations to them. I was really surprised at how well Entelo runs, how well the recruiting processes are set up, how focused the company is on candidate experience, how engaged everyone is in interviewing. It is, I said before I came on board and after I'd accepted my offer that I was incredibly honored to be the person that was selected for this role. And I feel more honored and privileged every day being here. Honestly, it's an absolutely amazing place to work. I've never seen hiring managers and hiring teams so incredibly engaged. So I can't honestly say that there's anything that we're ripping out. I think there's a lot of stuff that we are looking to improve and grow and enhance and set up so that we can continue to scale.
So what are some of those things that you're tweaking a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So kind of like you said, when you walk into any environment, I think it's really important to think about what you want to achieve in the first 30, 60, 90 days, and then what happens from there. And we sat down as a recruiting team and spent a half day really brainstorming around what do we think is great, where do we think there's opportunity, what do we want to tackle in the first 3 months, and what are the nice to have things that we can continue to work on in the future. And the ones for us were really heavily focused around systems and process, making sure that our ATS is really set up well. We haven't had a regular cadence for reporting here as a company at Entelo. So what are the recruiting metrics that we want to report on that we think are important for a company of our size, that are relevant? And that a lot of that's also just getting out there and learning. I'm on a new ATS using Greenhouse, which is a wonderful product, but new to them.
Right.
So there's a lot of learning that goes on behind that, but wanting to make sure that we as a company are creating best practices that we can say are the best. We're doing the best as a company, but we're also able to evangelize those to our customers. They're sort of, we've kicked the tires on this, we've poked, we've prodded, we've massaged processes, and we feel really confident about what we're doing and why we're doing it, and want to be able to share that with our colleagues in the industry.
So we haven't talked a whole lot about reporting on the show. So I'm curious, you said that we didn't have a regular cadence, so you wanted to set that up. What are some of those recruiting metrics that we thought, or that you thought, I suppose, were important for us at this stage?
Yeah. So, things that I'm always looking at, I always like to understand what's my cost of hire. So it was one of the first things that I came in was I went straight down to finance, and I really wanted to understand what's the recruiting budget and how are we spending money? Are we spending money on agencies? Are we spending money on employee referrals? Like what are the things that we can pull on, and what are the things that we can push on to make sure that we're getting the most out of the money that we're spending? So cost per hire is a big one. When I calculate cost per hire, I think of it as being everything that comes into recruiting. So it's your head count in terms of who are the people on my team and their salaries, all the way to what are the employee referral bonuses that we paid out this quarter and how much did that cost us? Candidate expenses. You name it, it really runs the gamut. But I think that's also a big one because you want to look at it as you're planning for the future around how many people we're going to hire in the next year. Is that number going to be higher? Ultimately, our cost per hire should go down as we hire more. We may have a bigger team, but we'll also have a better cadence around certain things. So it will be easier to execute on hiring, where a lot of things for us are unique each time, like these senior software engineers. Candidate experience, I think, is a huge thing that we want to measure. And we have, since I've been here, started using the template through Greenhouse to survey our candidates after they come in and interview to really understand what was positive about the experience and where could we have improved. I think that we need to be open to hearing all sorts of criticism, and we need to be open to sharing that feedback internally. Were you on time for the interview? Did you close the interview? Right. There's an onus on us to make sure that people feel really good about the process that they come through as a candidate, from whether they apply, whether they're sourced as a passive candidate, all the way through to whether they get the offer or not. So that's definitely another metric that I feel really strongly about. So I think cost per hire, time to hire, candidate experience are all on the top of the list for me.
What about source? What is your view on a company of our size and what the source should be for candidates, the breakdown of that?
Yeah, so we're exceptionally high. Our employee referral rate is at 43%, which is fantastic, and that's a number that we should strive to retain. I think in other terms of source, certainly looking at passive candidates, and we have an amazing product. So being able to go out and search people and send them track mails is such a luxury that we have for every single employee in the company. So that's another that I would expect as we continue to evolve that will continue to be our number 2 source of hire, assuming employee referrals stays number 1. I think that job boards are important, but in smaller environments, it makes sense that we only post jobs to Greenhouse, probably Craigslist, Indeed. There are some specialized boards in the event that we're really looking for a Ruby developer and we have the opportunity to post on a developer's blog or something like that. I think when you get into larger organizations, then you can start to really break down source of hire around if you're hiring for university or internships or different levels. In a small environment like this, the sources that I would want to look for are employee referral, source passive candidate, and job board. And I would lump job board into what are all the job boards that we invest in, rather than break it down, because it's going to be like one hire here and one hire there, and it won't really show anything meaningful in terms of metrics.
Right. Also, it seems that source of hire is going to differ just depending on the seniority of the role. So, for example, if you are hiring for a lot of entry-level salespeople, maybe you would look to university recruiting for that. Mm-hmm. So then you're looking at like university career fairs, maybe inbound people, maybe referrals from that team.
Exactly.
Versus like your executives are probably not going to hit the apply now button, right? Mm-hmm. Like you might need to have an executive firm. So like, can you get a meaningful benchmark there? Do you have to break it down by seniority? Like how do you make that data tell a story?
Yeah, so you can tell the story based on each individual job. So if I were going to run a report for John, our CEO, I would expect my ATS, which ours does, to be able to drill down into one single job and say, here's the VP of product that we're looking for, and here's everything that's happening within that job. And then the flip side of that being, I can show you the entire funnel for all of the jobs that we have open. So I think for the most part, you're kind of looking at what is the law of averages tell you for most reporting.
What do you think is the most important metric to John?
Our CEO.
Our CEO.
Yeah. Wow. That's a good question. I think it's still quality of hire. I think it's always going to be quality of hire. I think for anyone out there who interviews at a company, you really want to feel like you know what you're getting yourself into, right? Like your first day on the job, you should feel like I made a great decision. And a month into the job, you should feel even better about that decision. And I think that's totally true for Entelo. And I think we spend a lot of time in our interview process. I would probably argue to make it shorter and faster. But I've also grown to be more open-minded, understanding that our CEO is so involved that he interviews every candidate, that it's really important to him that people feel like they have the opportunity to ask him anything that they want and that they feel really good about their decision coming in here. So without having surveyed him prior, I would say I think it's definitely still quality of hire.
How do you measure quality of hire?
It's a great question. And it's not something that we have formally instituted here. I think the biggest measure is doing a check-in after 30, 60, 90 days with the hiring manager and with the team. And then if you're looking to do a long-term measurement on quality of hire, I would do it based on performance in the job. So the assumption is if you have a good interview process and you vet a candidate for all of the right things around what you're looking for and their competencies and capabilities around being able to do the job, if you do that well, it will equate into a good quality hire. And then how that person moves through the company and grows and excels will also speak to the quality of that hire. So, I mean, one of the things that I've noticed in my career is that there are people that you can see really, really excel at a company with 10,000 or more people in it. And they're brilliant, right? They've got a pedigree degree from a top university. They're highly accomplished. And suddenly they come to a tiny little startup, and let's say they're in sales, they're used to having their lead spoon fed to them, and that doesn't happen anymore. And it doesn't mean that they're not still brilliant and that they're not highly qualified for a whole variety of jobs out there, but they may not have been a good quality hire for that company because they don't have the DNA that it takes to be successful in the environment that they're in. So it can vary.
That brings up an interesting topic. I've had conversations about this before, is really identifying candidates for stage fit. And how do you really do that? I mean, I think for sales, it's a little bit more obvious. Okay, are they hitting their numbers? What does their pipeline process and all of that look like? What about one-off roles or roles that it's not so defined? How do you really identify whether a candidate is good for your stage of the company?
Yeah, so I think that's a lot of it's based around the interview questions that you ask and really understanding how they deal with certain situations. So I'm definitely a huge fan of competency-based interviewing and making sure that you're digging into understanding how somebody is going to get something done, how they engage other people when they need to, how they collaborate, how they work independently, how in an environment like this, how they work with very little information, how much of a self-starter or entrepreneurial spirit do they have. I definitely think Entelo is the type of environment where you have to be proactive as it relates to you're getting your job done. If you're sitting around waiting for somebody to drop off a manual with a bunch of instructions on how to turn on your laptop and set up your Gmail, you're going to be waiting for a while.
Yeah.
May I presume to dig into your relationship a little bit?
Please.
Sure.
So I'm just curious, so you start and then maybe so your first one-on-one with Amina, let's get past the one-on-one where you learn about her dreams and aspirations and goals, which they're important. Don't mean to denigrate those. But what are the kind of things you wanted to know? Did you want to know her process, or what were the things that when you were trying to figure out what is recruiting like here? And you probably had a pretty good idea coming in, but once your boots on the ground, all right, let's roll up our sleeves and get into it. What were the kind of things that you were curious to know from Amina?
Yeah, sure. So feel free to chime in anytime. One of the things that's really important to me whenever I kick off a one-on-one or when I'm working with a new team is that the people that I work with understand that I believe that the one-on-one time is that of the subordinate. That sounds awful. What is it? It's
underling.
I know, the underling. Yes. So in this case,
Minion.
my direct report, my minions.
Direct report is good.
Yeah. So Amina's my direct report. But I really wanted her to know that it's her time. And so in recruiting, there is definitely a tactical piece. And I think we're in touch every day, multiple times a day, on Slack, in person, on email, you name it. I'll text her at 5:30 on a Friday and be like, so I noticed you logged off. I still have questions for you. So with that tactical piece, I think the first 10 to 15 minutes of a one-on-one are, for me, still about let's check in. How are you doing? How's your pipeline? Do you feel supported? What do you feel that you need from me? What do you feel you need from your managers? And just checking the boxes to make sure that she feels like she has the tools to deliver on what's expected of her. Because it's not just that she's delivering to me, she's delivering to people throughout the company. She has a lot of clients. And then the rest of it's really her time. So we've talked about career development. We've talked about learning how to manage difficult conversations, managing up. Like it really runs the gamut. And there are definitely things that I'll say to her. I'm like, I don't know how I do this. Like, I don't even think about it. Some things just I've been doing for a while.
Right.
And so, my primary focus is how I can continue to help Amina feel like she's being fed, not just in terms of having recs to fill, but that she feels like she's in a role where she sees a career path for herself.
Sometimes I calendar stalk her and ask her if I can join her meetings.
That's cool. What meetings have you jumped in on? Calendar stalking. Also, that's a new one for me. I haven't heard that, but I'm definitely guilty of it. I'm like, where's my boss right now? Can I get away with doing fantasy football for the next 8 minutes?
We had a meeting with an agency yesterday, and I wanted to sit in on that. And then I actually added this in our one-on-one meeting today. It was like, can I sit in on you to learn how you negotiate contracts with agencies too? Because those are things that are really important to me. One of the things that I told Britt in the beginning was, outside of just Rex, which she mentioned, was I want to learn how she's working with all areas of our business. So how do you partner with finance? How do you partner with sales? How do you partner with marketing? How do you partner with different leaders? How are you working on different projects? Because that's really interesting to me as well.
I love this. We can just this can just be your one-on-one with my commentary. So going into something you said a minute ago, Britt, Amina, what do you need from Britt, like, to open up channels in the organization, or like what is her supporting you look like?
I think it's different every week, right? So some questions I had, okay, let's figure out what are our metrics, because we have these 3 senior engineers that we really need to hire, getting guidance from her on what are her expectations and the team's expectations in terms of how much outreach I need to do. Other conversations are, maybe there's a hiring manager that we really need to get something from and they've been unresponsive. So A, how do we strategize and what do we do? And B, getting guidance on her, how to learn how to manage up better. Those are things that are really important to me in growing in my career. And those are things that I know that she's great at. So learning from her, in seeing her learning from her by action, and also learning from her in terms of mentorship by asking questions and getting answers.
So when you say managing up, that's hiring managers, right?
Yeah.
So does that just like holding their feet to the fire in terms of doing like giving their interview feedback in the ATS, or like even making time for interviews or sync ups? What does that look like?
It could be a variety of things. It's getting job descriptions. It's getting guidance on, since we at Entelo do a lot of SOBO, which is send on behalf of, making sure, for me, it's making sure that I'm sending the right messaging from hiring managers. Sometimes hiring managers aren't getting back to you. Or Britt mentioned we had survey feedback and we got some constructive criticism for one of our hiring managers, and I wanted to navigate how to give that feedback. So it's just learning how to navigate up and making sure that our hiring managers aren't looking at us as just resources, but we're business partners and we're helping them be better in their roles as well.
Would you add anything, Britt?
I think you got it. I do love that. Like, we really are business partners, and that's, I think, such a key component to it, is really having a partnership as opposed to being order takers.
Right, like being flat in the organization almost, like you're like on an even keel. So it's like we're not your underlings.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly that. It's but it's really, recruiting has evolved so much, and you will still be out there and hear people say, I need resumes. And fortunately, people are so leaned in here at Entelo that that's not the case, but there still continues to be an education process around the time and energy that it takes to go from 0 to having warm leads that are coming in the door, and then also really having managers be educated around what their role is in the process, how to, build a rapport with a candidate, how to make the candidate feel comfortable, being on time. Like, there are a lot of basics that we have to review, not only with the hiring managers, but with anyone who's involved in the interview process. And it's a partnership and sort of an agreement. And there's a lot of trust there too, around playing our roles and doing our jobs and getting them done for each other so that we can all be successful.
What would your advice be to a recruiter who's at an organization maybe where people aren't leaning in? Say they're getting, and the hiring manager's like, I need more resumes. Mm-hmm. And obviously the response is like, no, you need more quality people. Like, what would your advice be to them?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many different scenarios that you can play out. Certainly one that I've seen before, you know, Rob, you mentioned quality. And I think it's okay in the onset of a search to have a few candidates that come in that help you to calibrate. And it's perfectly okay to say, I really thought that I wanted an apple, but it turns out that I want an orange. And so we need to pivot and shift. And for a hiring manager and a hiring team and a recruiter, that should be an easy thing to do. And that should be part of the partnership. But if you have a hiring team that says, we need XYZ, and you deliver 3 candidates with XYZ, and for one reason or another, those people aren't making it through, and there isn't a reason outside of, I just didn't feel it, or they're not a culture fit, or I wouldn't want to be stuck in an elevator with them. Those are all big warning signs for me of, you know, that you're not really getting to the root of what this person's capable of and whether or not they're an appropriate candidate for the job. And so when you do encounter that, the 2 things that I really like to do, well, probably 3 things. Number 1, I like to break out the SLA and say, here's what it takes to fill a job in 8 weeks. Here's the role of the recruiter. Here's the role of the coordinator. Here's the role of the hiring manager, the hiring team. You know, break it out in terms of you actually have a responsibility. It's not 100% on the recruiting team to be delivering to you. There's also showing the funnel metrics, and I think funnel metrics always come into play or are most important when a search is in trouble. And at that point, I always call it the guts of the search,
Right.
where it's really like, let's open up this body, take out all of the guts, and sort them based on the category that they're in or what place they are in the funnel. I think that's really important for hiring managers to see, like, oh, you've interviewed 36 people. Like something's really wrong there.
That's
If
too
you're
many,
bringing
yeah.
in 36 people and they're all making it to an on-site interview, but they're not making it through, you know, what's going on? And then you can start to ask questions around, is the hiring team aligned on what they're actually looking for? And are they communicating about this? And really dig into that. So the guts of the search is definitely important.
So, like, is that just kind of a gut instinct of what's too many at certain stages of the funnel? It probably changes per role and organization, but like, when should recruiters be concerned that their funnels are not like optimal?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've had 4 on-sites and none of those 4 people have made it through to a second round, that's a really good time to recalibrate. To me, if you have 4 on-sites and especially if you're a seasoned hiring team and you're talking about, you know, whether you're hiring a senior account executive on the sales team or you're hiring a Ruby developer for the software team, even as a small company, we have enough history in hiring for those types of roles where we should be pretty well versed at doing it. And if we're not getting people through, then there's something broken. And it might be we've hired a bunch of people and maybe they're not as up to speed on what our hiring practices are. But by having the data, you can then go back in and investigate and sort of poke holes and see where the breakdown is.
What's something that you'd change if you could wave a magic wand and just change something about the way that recruiting is done here? What would you change?
I honestly, I think the biggest thing, if I could just start with a brand new ATS, that's, you know, you're always going to inherit something. And I think there are things that we've done as a smaller company. For example, we don't do offer approvals and we don't do offer letters and we don't have recs approved in our system. And so there's no history there. I can't go back and say, well, what are our metrics from the start of the company, even though we've been on the same ATS the whole time. So those are things for me where, like, I'd love to be able to come in and sort of say, this is exactly how I want it to be. Now go make that happen. Mm-hmm. But that hasn't happened yet in my career, and I'm not betting that it will unless I'm employee number 1.
Right.
So
What has been the most surprising thing that you've noticed while being at Entelo?
well, so it's twofold. One I had mentioned earlier, which was just how incredibly well structured things are from a recruiting function. I mean, the company does a really good job of bringing people in, scheduling them, providing a great candidate experience, following up. I mean, we really do touch every candidate that comes to us, which is amazing. So that's one. I think the other one, I'm used to coming from an environment, if somebody says, we need to hire these 3 software developers and we need to get it done in the next 8 weeks, that really falls on recruiting. And it's not to say that you can't have a great relationship with the hiring manager and that the hiring manager is not involved and that they're going to be present and engaged. And if you find a great candidate for them, that they'll be available to speak with that candidate. But I think everyone at Entelo wears the hat of a recruiter and just goes above and beyond. So we've got, directors in engineering who are out searching for candidates and adding them to lists and emailing them. And, it gives us the ability to more than double our outreach in the same period of time by having them so leaned in. So.
And then like the team specific sourcing sessions, right? That you shooed me away from the other day when you had the engineers in the cafeteria doing their thing.
That's amazing to me. I think a lot of times you'll talk about it in practice, but to see everyone just stop what they're doing, get up from their desks and go to an area where we're all together sourcing, and just, that everyone's doing that. They're not checking their Facebook or doing anything else. And we're all adding to a list and we're all doing the outreach. It's a really special thing.
Yeah. And as long as no loudmouth marketers come through there, they're able to be productive.
That's true. Yes. Yeah.
Well, as we approach optimal podcast length, Britt, this is awesome. You were everything I hope you'd be and more. You didn't make a liar out of me when I promised this would be a good episode. I think it was truly excellent, and I hope you will come back anytime you want to. I would love for you to be a regular on the show. I'm sure all of Podcast Land would be. I'm sure Amina, of course, would as well. So thank you so much. This is awesome.
Thank you.
And to all of you out there in Podcast Land, thank you so much for tuning in once more. You've been wonderful, amazing, beautiful, talented recruiters, and I've been Rob Stevenson. Have a spectacular week, and happy hunting.